Good evening, and welcome to tonight's discussion, which looks at Chapter 4, which discusses the various environments that marketers have to deal in. Now, if you think back to when I talked about Chapter 2 in the marketing plan, I mentioned how important environments are when you're looking for the opportunities and the threats that face a marketer. So tonight what I want to do is let's talk about some of the core opportunities and threat areas you're likely to face in your marketing career. The first one that you're probably most familiar with is the concept of social media and the impact it's had on behavior. If you think about it, social media has opened up a brand new world to consumers. It's the first time ever that marketers and consumers have been able to talk in real time and to share information back and forth. It's also given consumers incredible power because now what they can do is talk to each other about the company or about the marketer if you want, and how that marketer is treating them either individually or as a group. That makes a huge difference in how we as marketers approach them. But that's just the beginning. The big thing marketers are looking at today is this whole concept called the Internet of Things. What we're doing is we're taking anything and everything that a consumer touches and we're connecting it to the internet so that we can see what consumers are doing. If you go to the appliance store, let's say you go to Best Buy right now, go into Best Buy, have a look at some of the new refrigerators. The new refrigerators come complete with internet connections. Now you're probably thinking, well, what's wrong with that? Well, on the face of it, really nothing. I mean, the fact that you've got a refrigerator that's connected to the internet means that when you're standing there looking inside your fridge and trying to figure out what you're going to make for dinner, you can type the ingredients into a website like recipes.com and get information out telling you what you can make with those items that you have. That sounds great. But here's what marketers are looking at. Right now, you can go online, either with Walmart or Amazon or Hugo's, and you can order things, and they'll deliver them to you, either via UPS in the case of Amazon, or in the other cases, they'll deliver them through other means, or you might even go and pick them up, click and pick, which is a big trend right now. What you're going to find, though, is if you take those items and put them into your refrigerator, if your refrigerator comes complete with a barcode scanner, the same thing you find at any checkout, it'll read how much or what product is going into the fridge. Now, if we put small scales on each one of the shelves, we can then measure as a marketer how much you're using. That allows us to automatically reorder things for you. That allows us to tell your usage rates. All of these things are crucial when we're trying to figure out how to change the product, how to market the product, okay? Market is in terms of advertise it, how to price the product, and maybe even how we deliver the product to the consumer. So now what we've got is this whole concept of connecting the Internet of Things. You've probably heard about facial recognition. That's a big issue right now. San Francisco just last week voted to ban facial recognition. It's being heavily used in countries like China. And here's how we use it as a marketer. You walk into a store. Let's say it's Forever 21. You go into Forever 21. The security camera picks you up. Now, right now, the security camera is really trained to look to see if you're doing something nefarious, like shoplifting. But now what it could do is it could do a facial recognition on you, look and see if you've been in the store before, not just that store, but any store in the Forever 21 chain. Pull up what you last purchased. If you used your credit card, pull up your name. It could then send that to a sales associate on the floor, who could then approach you and contact and address you by name and say, hey, last time you purchased this, we've got this particular item over here, which would be a great addition to it. That's how we use the Internet of Things. Now, in addition to the Internet of Things, we also have crowdsourcing of ideas. And last week you saw in the background the Lego rocket I had of the Saturn V as we get ready to celebrate the 50th anniversary of man's landing on the moon. Well, that was a crowdsourced product. Every year, Lego throws out to its user base, which products would you like to see? And people show them how they've built a particular product, in that case a rocket. Then Lego looks to see how big is the market, how easy is it for them to make the necessary parts. And based on those decisions, or based on those two factors, they can decide whether or not they want to produce the part or not. Lay's potato chips does the same thing every year when they have, let's choose a new flavor. And you can really see, as we're going to see in the next chapter, how consumer behavior plays a role in that. We also have influencers. The Kardashians are probably the greatest influencers right now in consumer products. It's rumored that Kylie Jenner gets paid $1 million for an Instagram piece. Well, what they know is if Kylie Jenner is showing using something, it's going to have a tremendous influence on people buying it. That's the power of social media. So if you want to look at one area to look at in the environment, social media, take a look at the good or the bad. Now, I've also attached to the chapter a video for you to take a look at social media myth versus reality. So in addition to that, you've got to worry about demographics. You may have heard the phrase demographics before. Let's start with the basics. Let's start about population. And first off, let me congratulate you. You, as millennials, are now the largest single population group in the United States. You have surpassed baby boomers, who are dying off at, I think it's the rate of 1 million a day or some ridiculous number. No, it's not quite that bad. They're starting to die off because the original baby boomers are in their late 70s now. Okay, they're in their 75th year. So they're starting to expire. Well, from a marketing perspective, they've been gone for a decade because usually marketers consider you economically dead at 65 because of the way your income works. We'll talk about that in a bit. So what you find is millennials are now the big group. Well, they control a lot of expenditures. And because of that, you as millennials are driving how retail works. So when you talk about kind of the death of malls, it's because you as millennials don't like to go to malls. Baby boomers, who are the old biggest group, back in the 80s loved to go to malls. The average boomer used to spend like 2 hours a week in a shopping mall. I think if most millennials spent 2 hours a year in a shopping mall, they might think they died because it's just way too much. Well, that shows you the difference. So millennials today want to get in, buy something, and get out. So as we shift to millennials, we have to take account of your changing preferences. What do you look for? How do you want to buy? How do we market to you? What's the difference? What kind of features and benefits do we have to talk about? And as you see that, you'll start to see how the changes take place. Now, to help you with that, I've posted the video Millennials and Why We Hate Them. Spoiler alert, it's because you're just different. Okay, every group has the same thing. Every generational shift has the same thing. All right, so what's another area you want to take a look at? Well, let's talk about ethnic markets. The United States is a melting pot. We have people from all over the world coming here and living here. And if you take a look, there are some very distinctive demographic groups in the United States. Hispanic Americans, for example, despite the fact we think they're a homogeneous group, are not. They differ greatly whether you're in California, Texas, where I used to teach, or you're over in Florida, or even up in New York, where it's a heavy Puerto Rican influence. Okay? So what you have to understand as a marketer is, how do you market to each one of those different subsets of the Hispanic market without upsetting them? Now, what do we know about them? Well, they're the largest user of mobile technology, which some people find quite interesting. The other thing is, they were one of the first groups to take a real bicultural and bilingual approach to media. So we see things like Telemundo. We see a lot of Spanish language television. Well, that means as a marketer, you have to start producing things in Spanish. If we go back to the Kardashians for a minute, one of the big complaints about why Kim Kardashian and the Kardashian clan haven't been able to crack the Chinese market is they insist on posting everything in English, which, even though most Chinese speak some English, is a bit of an insult. So if they switched over to Mandarin or one of the other mainstream dialects, they might have greater success in that market. In addition to the Hispanic market, another major market in the United States is the African American market, a much younger demographic than the bulk of the population, tremendous influencers of pop culture, tremendous compared to other groups, very brand loyal, especially to groups that support social causes. You're all too young to remember, but in the big riots after the Rodney King verdict back in the 80s, one of the few places that went untouched by the rioters were the McDonald's. And the reason why was McDonald's spent a lot of time and effort identifying with the community and supporting community causes. And the rioters chose not to target those where they did target businesses for looting that did not support the community. So you see how that plays out even beyond what we would consider basic consumer behavior. Okay, they also have increasing household income, which is great. Okay, we love to see household income increasing. And the reason I mention that is 2018 was a monumental year. In 2018, American incomes returned to the same level they were in the year 2000. For almost 2 decades, American incomes had been declining to flat. Now, what that meant was, as an economy, we couldn't spend a lot on consumer goods. We could buy things, but we were ending up going into huge amounts of debt to do it, which partially led to the meltdown in 2008, which most of you will remember. Okay, but it had a bigger impact in that it definitely capped what we could spend. And when we did spend money, we tended to spend it on much lower priced merchandise, which explains why we've got some of the issues we do today in our trade imbalance. Now, 2018 comes along. We finally got back to that same level. But there are 2 other things that are now at play. Remember I said the boomers are retiring? Well, at 65, most marketers consider you statistically dead, for lack of a better phrase, because you now have 0 income power. By the time you hit 65, theoretically you're retired, although that's being pushed back later and later for a lot of people. Go back to declining incomes for 20 years. But it also, if you're drawing a pension, it means that you're not really earning in the economy, and marketers don't like to focus on people who don't have a source of income that can increase. They're not looking for somebody who's drawing down on something like a pension plan or 401k savings or whatever. So what you've got is, on the one hand, we've got incomes have reached back up to where they were in 2018. On the downside, a lot of that income is now coming from passive forms, okay, which means that marketers are a little leery about marketing to it, but we're going to have to change when we do that. And we're also finding that education is not as big a driver as it once was. Your textbook talks about it's still a primary driver. Long term it is, but what we do know is that people today can end up getting a bachelor's degree and not be able to earn as much as, let's say, somebody who's working in a trade, like a bricklayer or a pipe fitter or something like that, or an area like that. So we're starting to see more of a push into the trades as well, and seeing those as equivalent to a bachelor's degree. When you're looking at income, the other thing you have to take advantage of, or take account of, is purchasing power. Well, here in North Dakota, we have great purchasing power. The cost of living is cheap compared to the incomes we get. That's much different than if you lived in New York. In New York, if you're making $100,000, your chances of living in Midtown Manhattan are pretty slim because that's pretty much a low income when you're spending $5,000 a month for a one bedroom. In North Dakota, that 100,000 goes a lot further. Food is cheaper here, your accommodations are cheaper, all of those things are cheaper. So when you're looking at a marketing opportunity, you not only have to look at the total dollars that the person has to spend, but you have to look at the purchasing power they have. Do they have anything? Sometimes we talk about discretionary income. Do they have anything where they can spend money on your product or service? Okay. And I've given you a link to a Forbes article that talks about that. Another area that we're worried about when it comes to opportunities and threats is technology. Early on, I talked about the whole concept of the Internet of Things, things like facial recognition, things like your refrigerator, keeping track of what you buy so it can automatically reorder. Well, we're seeing more and more of that. Probably the greatest advantage we have as marketers and the greatest threat to consumers is your phone. Your phone is a tracking device. You're no more than a two-legged deer with that phone. As if we can tap more and more of that information to see where you go, how long you spend there, what you do, and we can tap that into your browsing history, we can get a really good vision of what you are like as a consumer. Now, there's some privacy concerns there, and we've seen some privacy pushback. So we'll have to take account of that kind of technology going forward. But keep in mind, technology is one of the things that's going to change things, whether it's self-driving vehicles, whether it's drone technology, whether it is the Internet of Things, whether it is RFID tags, which we'll talk about in a later chapter, whether it's the rise of robots in a variety of different areas. All of those things are changing the way fundamentally we do business as consumers. Now, here's a great example for you. Remember I talked about how baby boomers used to spend 2 hours a week in a shopping mall. Well, they did that for a couple of reasons. One is back in the 80s, there was no internet. So shopping malls were kind of a form of entertainment. And if you take a look at some of the what are considered to be classic teen movies from that era, they were always shot or always had a big role. The mall played a big role in them. Why? Because that was the gathering spot. But also because at that point, people loved to shop. Well, then along came the internet, which made shopping much different. It wasn't no longer a social activity. 2 in the morning, you can be sitting there in your underwear, or however you want to do it, scanning Amazon for a product or a service. What Amazon did is it made stuff easier to buy. So today what we've got is, we've got a system which is easy to buy, but it's killed shopping as we know it. So now we've got to figure out how to make that technology work for us. Or if we're a physical retailer, how do we get people to come back? How do we provide an experience through the store that technology currently can't match? Now that's getting tough because technology is bringing in things like tactile gloves so you can feel a cloth or you can feel material in a suit. It's bringing in things like artificial reality where you can sense what it's like to use a product. It's bringing in all sorts of things, including 3D printing, where now you don't even have to leave your house. You just buy a 3D printer, sit at your house and go, I'm interested in this particular product, I'll print it out. And if you think that's limited, consider now we can 3D print proteins, which means you don't have to go to the meat counter anymore. You can print it in your house. That's a few years away though, okay? So take a look at the video I've posted about innovation and employment, because that'll give you a really good idea about where that's going. Next up's the political and legal forces. Well, since President Trump's come in, he's made a big push towards reducing regulation. That has been one of the major complaints about business is they were facing so many regulations it was tough to get anything accomplished. Well, the current administration has said they'll only bring a new regulation in if they can drop 2 existing regulations, and they've started to loosen up on regulations. Well, that's made it easier for companies to produce products, to market products, to do all sorts of things with their products. Now, will that continue? I would argue yes, for at least the next 6 years, given the current situation. After that, who knows? We could go back to a very regulated economy. If you want to go into the European economy, that's far more regulated, or even Canada, just 60 miles north of us, 75 miles north of us, is much more regulated in a lot of respects than we are. And if we want to export as a marketer, we have to meet those goals. The last area we want to look at is competitive forces. And the one area to take a look at that point is global competition. It used to be that we in the United States would see competitors as coming from a next state or 4 or 5 states over. The biggest change today is just the global nature of competition. Whether it's retailers like Zara, H&M, Aldi coming into the market, or it's international firms like Huawei coming into the communications market, we're seeing a major change in what's going on. Well, as marketers, that means 2 things. One is we have to look globally for product. We have to look globally for markets. But 2, we also have to prepare for those particular companies to compete against us. So we need to understand their strengths, their weaknesses, so that they can come in and we can protect ourselves. Competition is good, but you have to prepare for it. The upshot of all of this is when you're preparing your marketing plan, you have to look at the environment that you're going to focus in. That's where your opportunities and threats are going to come from, whether it's population-based, technology-based, regulatory-based, competition-based, whatever it is, that's where your opportunities and threats come from. You need to be able to understand those. Research them, use secondary research, and we'll see that more in marketing research. That's it for this chapter. When we come back, we'll talk about consumer behavior.